great product into a successful company. Just so you know, my style here is speak up, yell out questions, talk. I'd rather have this be a conversation than my lecturing at you, because you're going to hear stuff I say and you're going to hear words differently than I mean them. We're going to use the same words and mean different things. It just may strike you in a different way because your situation is different. So where you're coming from is different from where I'm coming from, so please ask questions, tell me if things don't make sense, tell me if you have a great example of something that does make sense, and we'll go from there. That's what we were just talking about, the numbers. But the interesting thing is that why do those companies succeed the first 2 years? So those 57%, 57% who actually do succeed, what is it that they're doing right? And those are the companies who are in the same position you are. Number one, they have the right product. And number two, they have the right timing. And those are two things that are really hard to change. If you don't have the right product at the right time, you're not going to succeed. That will get you through those first couple of years. The question is that enough to get you through the first 5 years? And statistically, our research indicates no. It simply isn't. That doesn't make you a company. And I understand that what you're doing this week is really looking at marketing. How do you sell yourself? How do you get out there? How do you present yourself? What do you do from a digital standpoint? I used to do a lot of work in social media and digital marketing. What do you do there? What do you do? Word of mouth. How do you get this all going? But what I'd like you to think about for a few minutes, and do any of you have partners in the room? Or okay, well, if you have a partner in the room, you can work together. If not, you can pick a partner or just do it on your own. I'd like to take a few minutes of just asking you to think about, when you're marketing, what are you marketing? What are the activities? Who are you reaching? Who are you addressing? And what are you really selling? And I'm going to ask you to share some of your thoughts, but we're going to just take a couple minutes in quiet thought, jot things down, and think about it as you put together your marketing plans. Anyone have any thoughts on who you're addressing when you're going out there with your marketing activities? Yeah.
So for us, we're actually selling the experience, we're selling the freedom, control, sustainability. It's really, we're selling the space and possibility, and then we're getting paid for the product that provides that, more like GoPro does, where they get paid for the camera, but that's not what they're selling.
Right. Who are you addressing?
So it's interesting, we started out thinking it was a product, but now all of our inbound, it was our clients are addressing. So we have STEM education, we have healthcare, then we have independent individual gardeners, if you will, or people that just want to eat healthy. And it's interesting, they're defining our channels for us, just from maybe one being evangelist. It's all inbound at this point.
Okay. Anyone else? Who are you addressing?
We're addressing pediatricians of clinics that are typically less than 20 or so pediatricians, where they're private clinics and they have full ability to adopt our software, where they already value developmental screenings or want to do more developmental screenings. And even though what we're selling is a piece of software to these clinics, it's really about increasing their reimbursement, which helps their revenue.
Okay.
But also, there's like I mean, everybody wants to make sure that none of the kids get left behind. So there's that whole mentality there, as well as for some of these clinics, they see it as a competitive advantage versus other clinics, or it looks like they're more acquirable to hospitals. They can get acquired, more likely to be acquired from a hospital.
Okay.
So we have a tissue engineering nipple for nipple regeneration after mastectomy. So we have our target audience for breast cancer survivors and plastic surgeons. So the breast cancer survivors, we want to give them the feeling of being whole again after mastectomy. And then for plastic surgeons, we want them to be able to give their patients the innovative technology to kind of be like first in the field to use our technique.
Okay. Anyone else? Mm-hmm.
We're addressing K through 12 schools, higher education, and nonprofits for college and career readiness to prepare them for that academy.
Okay. All right, so what I'm hearing, I think, from everybody is you are addressing your potential buyers. And that's who's hearing your message, that's who you're going after, and that's what you're going out there. So you're trying to tell them what the experience is going to be from using your product. You're trying to tell them why the product is innovative, new, something they should be going after. And that's all great, and I agree with all of that. But when you put something out there in the marketplace, from a marketing standpoint, it's seen by other people as well. And it's seen by people who might work for you, right? It's seen by your competitors. What you are selling and what you are creating is not just your product, but your brand image as a company. So it's not just your product. It's your company that's going out there, particularly when you're new. Because part of the thing about being new is people are trying to figure out, who is this place, right? Do I want to work with them? Is this a company I trust? Is this a company I want to work for? Is this a company I have to worry about if I'm a competitor? Your marketing is much broader than the target audience you're going after. Oops. So we talk about it as moving your company from 2D to 3D. And by that we mean, when you talk about all the great things you just said, and you did a great job of identifying what you're selling and your target buyer, and your financing, how you're going to get that, the legal issues, your IP, your supply chain, what does that look like, how you're going to structure that, your technology, your IT, all those pieces of it, those are things you can put down on a piece of paper, and you can draw. You can draw it with a pencil, and you've made a 2D diagram, if you want, of your company. And for us, the big question becomes, and that takes you through the first 2 years. Once you hit that, the question is, how do you breathe life into that? How do you animate that? How do you make this a place that people want to do business with and want to work for? And that's going to have a life beyond that product. And that comes into totally different kinds of spaces. Then we're looking at things like leadership. How do you lead this company? Who are you? What kind of company are you? What's the culture? We're going to talk about culture a lot more in a minute, because you as leaders are going to set that culture, and that culture is going to be your definition in the marketplace. When people think of Google, they think of a particular kind of company. They don't just think of what Google provides. When people think of Elon Musk, they think of his culture and the company, the cool things they do, not just the products. And that's what you need to be looking at. So the leadership and culture are really important. Scaling. I don't know how many, those of you who have employees, I don't know how many you have. I'm guessing nobody has a whole lot more than 5 or 6 right now. Does anyone have a bigger team than that? How many do you have?
11.
11, okay. So there are certain pieces, certain steps as you're scaling where the culture you had and the way you work together stops working. When you have 5 or 6 or even 11 people, you can generally work together. It's usually very familial. It's usually everybody's passionate, everybody's working together, and it's really very cool. When you hit 20, you're going to find that what you were doing no longer works. When you hit 200, you don't know the name of everybody in your company. They are there for a job, to be honest. Not all of them have your passion, and the way you work is totally different. But if you want to maintain that culture, the question is, how do you maintain that culture as you get bigger? You need different ways to do that. We're working with a company right now that has a contract with the Navy, and we're scaling them from a small team of, we started off with about 6 people on this particular project. They're now at 4 shipyards from Hawaii to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And the guy who's running it says, yeah, but what made us successful was the culture we had when we had 6 people. And it's like, that's great, but you can't all sit around a table anymore and talk. It doesn't work. So how do we keep that culture and still make it bigger? So scaling becomes important. The people you hire become important. So animating your company is what we call it. Make it a 3D firm, make it come alive. So what makes your company come alive? And I'm going to show you, if you guys have some thoughts, we'd be happy to hear. There's some words, some common wisdom words that we hear a lot. I'm happy to share with you. But I'd like to know, before I kind of start to throw those up, there are things that you think make for a great company as you're doing that.
Just kind of going through this with a team of 6 to now 35 enlisted
Good job,
people
yeah.
that are just begging to work for us. This was huge. We don't talk about our product any longer, ever. I mean, really, they can see what the product is. But that company culture is about the whys, it's about the mission, it's about the vision, it's about the possibility. That's what seems at this point, until we get to that 200 that works.
Yeah, great. Anyone else? So we've done some research, and here's the common wisdom that tends to come out. Number 1, the team with the best players wins. How many of you believe that?
No.
Sometimes. We have business cards for Caution Strategies, and on the back of cards, we have, each card has a saying, a quote from somebody famous. We have 7 different quotes, and one of our quotes is, the team with the best players wins. It's a quote from Jack Welch at GE. Work hard, play hard. That's what you have to do to make this work. Right? When we work really, really hard. When we play really, really hard. Maybe. When we set up our company, we sat down and actually discussed what our culture was going to be. And we decided, instead of work hard, play hard, we were going to integrate personal and professional. So, because it's really hard to get away from that phone, and it's really hard to say, I'm going to play hard and pay no attention. When you're an owner, you're going to pay attention. So how do you integrate it so it works? And I'm going to come back to the team with the best players wins in a minute. Build a culture that people enjoy. How many of you think that's important?
Yes.
What makes people enjoy the culture?
Being heard.
Being heard?
Appreciated.
Appreciated?
Celebrating the small victories.
Great.
Great leadership.
Freedom.
Okay.
It means different things to different people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Unfortunately, you guys are smarter than most of the people we work with. Because mostly we hear things like, well, we have to think about tables.
Well, that's true too.
And I'm a fan. That happens to be my sport. So I'm not jumping on ping pong here, but we have beer in the fridge. We have free yoga and massages. Again, I'm a big fan of both yoga and massages, but we have happy hours. And the question is that enough? And I think you get filled in a lot of those other pieces. The things up here don't make a culture. Okay? They reflect a certain enjoyment of being together, but they really don't make a culture. And I had one person say to me recently about her firm, I hate the forced fun that we do. Right? So sometimes it backfires. I want to go back for a minute to the team with the best players wins. And any of you heard of a woman by the name of Margaret Heffernan? Are you familiar with her?
Vaguely.
So this is a small piece of a TED Talk she gave. When you see her picture, maybe this is politically insensitive, but when I first saw it, it was like, oh, you look like my grandmother used to look. She's a super smart, super successful businesswoman, an entrepreneur who has started 5 or 6 companies, sold them for many, many dollars. And she has some really interesting ideas about what makes this work. And the first thing she talks about is the team with the best players wins. So this is about 3 minutes. It's worth, oops, that didn't work. Worth taking a look at.
An evolutionary biologist at Purdue University named William Muir studied chickens. He was interested in productivity. I think it's something that concerns all of us. But it's easy to measure in chickens because you just count the eggs. He wanted to know what could make his chickens more productive, so he devised a beautiful experiment. Chickens live in groups, so first of all he selected just an average flock, and he let it alone for 6 generations. But then he created a second group of the individually most productive chickens. You could call them super chickens. And he put them together in a super flock. In each generation, he selected only the most productive for breeding. After 6 generations had passed, what did he find? Well, the first group, the average group, was doing just fine. They were all plump and fully feathered, and egg production had increased dramatically. What about the second group? Well, all but 3 were dead. They'd pecked the rest to death. The individually productive chickens had only achieved their success by suppressing the productivity of the rest. Now, as I've gone around the world talking about this and telling this story in all sorts of organizations and companies, people have seen the relevance almost instantly, and they come up and they say things to me like, that super flock, that's my company. Or, that's my country. Or that's my life. All my life I've been told that the way we have to get ahead is to compete. Get into the right school, get into the right job, get to the top. And I've really never found it very inspiring. I've started and run businesses because invention is a joy, and because working alongside brilliant, creative people is its own reward. And I've never really felt very motivated by pecking orders or by super chickens or by superstars. But for the past 50 years, we've run most organizations and some societies along the super chicken model. We thought that success is achieved by picking the superstars, the brightest men or occasionally women in the room, and giving them all the resources and all the power. And the result has been just the same as in William Muir's experiment: aggression, dysfunction, and waste. If the only way the most productive can be successful is by suppressing the productivity of the rest, then we badly need to find a better way to work and a richer way to live.
So let me start off by saying I'm not against people who went to great schools and who are smart. I'm not against hiring A+ players. I did all those things myself. So you need a good team around you. This is not to say hire, average people. No one goes out and looks for the C player. But it does say that you as a leader need to create a culture that's going to deal with these people carefully, and that you as a leader need to think about how you want people to progress in your company. What is that culture that's going to work? So let's start off by looking at sort of what is leadership? How do you lead is a critical question here. And clearly, I'm looking at when you hit that 2-year mark, what are you going to do? Do any of these resonate with you, or does this give you heartburn when you look at it?
Heartburn.
Why?
It's too linear.
Too linear?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Like, leadership is so much more than that. For me,
Sure.
when I had the biggest problems in my company, it was when a leader wasn't effective in communicating
Yep.
the raw vision and what's going on with this.
Yep.
Like fellow founders, or employees. I think everyone has a different form of leadership. Just to say
Absolutely.
that it's a part of, especially part process of social influence is not exactly correct from my perspective.
Okay.
I also think that sometimes leadership is really management, and people confuse it.
I think those are separate.
And they're separate. You can be a good manager, but not necessarily a leader, and vice versa. I've seen some great leaders who can't manage their way out of the bathroom. So, it's an interesting concept. We hear about leadership, but I think in the business world a lot it's interchangeable, and they're not necessarily. They can be, but they're not.
I would agree, they are two totally distinct and separate skill sets.
Yeah, it's not like a skill endorsement on LinkedIn, you know?
Yeah.
It's a little more than that.
That's true. Yeah.
The last statement, I'm looking at it and I'm wondering, it says that that leadership maximizes the efforts of others towards the achievement of the goal. So to my mind, what do the others, what do they get from that deal? You know, that's where it seems to me like someone, taking all the credit for the work of others.
Well,
What do they get from it?
I think that speaks to the difference between leadership and management too, because a leader wants the people who work under them to basically eventually replace their position. A manager wants to manage efficacy and efficiency, right? Those are very different aspects. One relates to inspiration and advancement, the other one relates to immediate succession, successful accomplishment of goals. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think his perspective was a little bit different. What's in it for the followers?
Right, followers.
Exactly.
And I think
Management
you
versus
addressed that,
leadership.
right, you addressed that well, because you say, this is what's in it, and being inspired, being groomed to replace or to go to higher responsibilities and get something for themselves.
And not all employees or followers want to follow in your footsteps and become the leader, though.
Right.
Right? So there may be something in it other than growing in that sense and being the next chicken to peck the ones below. It might be they love what they do and they want to go deeper into
It's
it.
necessary to have a mix of those people that have an effective culture, right? In the lab, well, back when I was in the biopharma area, in the lab you had the people that we kind of jokingly refer to as lab rats, and all they want to do is pipette for their career. That's it. They want to have pipette, have a nice culture, have fun at work, go home. They don't want to run the lab or come up with the next cure for cancer. It's my job, or my old job.
But there's also a distinction between those who do want to come up with the next cure for cancer and those who want to lead the lab, which is more of a business perspective.
Lab manager.
All right, so think about what kind of, I'm sorry.
You said something that I've never heard before that's very interesting, and I think it's really just hit home when you said that some people will want to, instead of going up, will want to dive deeper. That's an interesting, because we see that, the pipette person, they just want to be really the best damn pipetter ever, right? And that doesn't jive. I mean, I don't hear that because it's not really my brain.
Those people are awesome to have on your team.
They're necessary to have on your team. They are your product or your area experts. They're the ones who can solve the detailed problems. They are the ones who come up with the product innovations of the future. The technicians sometimes. Yeah. But in looking at what is leadership, the other question to think about is what kind of leader are you? And there are any number of different kinds of leaders. There are those who, grab the sword and yell, "Follow me!" And you can laugh, but there are people who like to do that. They like to follow, right? And they want someone to inspire them because that's what excites them. And if you're that kind of leader, you better think about what kind of culture you're setting up and what kind of people you're hiring. There are other leaders who they call them servant leaders, and you can read about it. There's lots of literature on it. Servant leaders lead from behind, and they don't get as much credit, right? But their view is a little bit more that of influencing, of listening, of guiding folks. Good and bad, that works in some places. It does not work in other places. So you need to think about what kind of leader you want to be. And as you think about that, think about the fact that the leader is always the final arbiter of decisions. Because even if you're a servant leader, if something goes down, you are responsible. It is your blame. If it goes splendidly, ideally you get credit and so does the team. But if it doesn't work, you make that decision and you take that fall. So you've got to be that final arbiter no matter how you lead. And yet, there's a really interesting statistic that almost a third of employees leave companies because they don't feel empowered. And we have found that statistically, employees who feel empowered are far more productive. And what do we mean by empowered? It means they can make decisions. And I'm going to give you an example of one that has never left me. Many years ago, I took a client to visit the FedEx call center. And I did because FedEx is reputed to have one of the best call centers in the country. You call them, they help you. They're just really good. And we had done a lot of work on what are the best practices in call centers, and I'd set up some call centers with them, and the ergonomic chairs and the whole thing. And we walked into this call center, and she and I just kind of went, ugh, because it violated everything I had talked to her about how they should be setting up theirs. And yet, it's got this great reputation. So what was going on? And we spent a day with them, with the managers and the people, and I talked to some of the folks on the phones, and it became really clear to me why they are so good. And they are good, by the way. They're good when you do any kind of research studies, you go out and ask people how they like them, they rank at the top. They have empowered employees on the phone. These are minimum wage people, by and large, who are empowered to make you happy. And one woman explained it to me this way. She said, I own that customer. When you call in, if I answer the phone, I own you. And I have to make you happy. And if I can't make you happy, I can't solve the problem in a way that you end up going, yes, I'm happy, then she, with no permission from her manager, with no asking, with no ceiling on what she can do, no measurements, has the authority to say, I can't make this person happy, so I'm going to send him or her either chocolates or flowers with a note that says, I am so sorry I couldn't resolve your issue to your satisfaction. And she loved that, because this was her choice. And I said to the manager, how do you control that? Sending chocolates to me is going to make me happy. Even if I was happy, I'm going to be happier later. And the manager said, well, look, we kind of look at how many people are sending on a monthly basis. They don't have a cap, they don't have a number, they don't have a minimum, they don't have a maximum. But we kind of know what's average. And if somebody's way out of average, either way low or way high, we just talk to them and find out what was going on. And sometimes it's a month that they just had a bunch of unhappy customers, and that's okay. And sometimes they just were able to resolve everything, and that's okay too. So they kind of eyeball it and watch it, but they give you the decision. And that made her feel empowered. And it was the happiest bunch of call center employees I have ever come across. And that is not the happiest group of employees you will usually find. And so what happened was, what happens in most best practices is, if you've ever gone out and tried to do best practices of what's best, who's the best company, typically what you find is, of the 10 things that make for best practice, they do 8 of them, okay, and they do 2 of them so spectacularly well that it overbalances everything else. And that's what they did. They empowered their employees. The question is, how do you empower your employees and still stay as the final arbiter of decisions? So for your businesses, that call center example is one. You've got different businesses, but think about that if you've got people who are creating product or talking to folks out in the field. How do you make them feel empowered? How do you make them empowered, not just feel empowered, and still not lose your leadership capability? Leadership drives your culture. It comes from the top. There is just no question about it. And the question I have for you is, are you a leader or are you a founder? And let me start by saying that founder is not a position, and it is not an activity. It is something that happens at a point in time. But being a founder does not give you any job in the company other than ideally to make money down the road. So what do you like to do? And I, in fact, mentioned it before. Do you like to lead or do you like to manage? You can do both, potentially, but you better think about it. Because if you don't like to manage the day-to-day, if that's not your thing, if that kind of detail is just stay away from me, who's doing it? And how are you going to hire somebody to do it who's going to fit well with you in your chicken group, in your flock? How many of you are consider yourselves to be the day-to-day manager? Fair enough. Sometimes you do that early on. How many of you have somebody else doing the day-to-day management? What are the issues you have with that?
Excuse me?
we were saying that we couldn't figure out who, I guess, is our manager. We all kind of manage ourselves, but maybe that's not always the best solution either.
How big is your group?
So, I mean, we're only like 4 people, 3 or 4 people, 1 part-time. So,
We all have the skills that we're good at,
yeah,
and we all, at least so far, have, our vision is very in line.
yeah.
But whenever there is decisions that need to be made,
We all want to call.
I would say there is a set person that is designated as whatever he says kind of goes. But from day-to-day management, because everyone's good at what they do, we don't really manage each other. We just we have our daily meetings, see hey how have things been going, and then weekly meetings, and just make sure everything's going well, and make sure the employees are achieving their goals. But we're not managing their work. We're just setting their goals and then making sure they achieve those goals, which maybe that's management. But
That's management.
But
That's absolutely management.
the reason we were talking about it was because we're not like talking in all like we're not interacting with them all the time about hey did you do this, did you do this. It's more of a this is what I need you to get done by the end of the week, and at the end of the week we look over and be like okay you got it, oh you didn't, why didn't you achieve that, and then we discuss it.
So management is not the same as micromanagement.
Yeah.
Seriously, setting goals and doing that is fun.
Yeah.
And the question I would ask you is, when you get to 10 employees, is that going to work?
Right.
Who's going to make sure everything stays together?
Right.
Yeah.
And then as you,
You just asked the issues. I mean, as we grew so fast, it's changing from that 6-person around the table to now trying to implement a completely different style. And as we're bringing on new people, figuring out how they fit. And that point on founders is interesting because I hear that a lot. But I'm a founder. I don't feel like I know what's going on. It's not a job. It's a point in time. So that's an interesting point that I'll probably bring up.
Something that's pretty effective for us recently, at least, was like I now look after like the long term, like operations, and then I have Chad, my co-founder, who looks after the day-to-day. So it's like both of us still manage our teams, but in completely different ways, and it's increased the effectiveness a lot.
okay, great. Anyone else? As you're looking at what you want to do, are you a leader? Are you a manager? Are you both? Are you, at this point, an investor who's kind of staffed and is stepping back and just serving as an advisor? You also want to think about the style that you want to have. Whether you're the command and control type, whether you're the servant leader, or whether you want to have a collaborative, flat organization. That is what I hear most of the young companies we work with say they want to have. It's really difficult because that doesn't obviate the need for a leader, okay? Everybody, when you're 11 or 35 people, everyone can't make decisions. Everyone can't be the one calling all the shots all the time. So how do you structure it so that you can get all of that input so people do feel empowered, but you're still a leader? So that one is usually what people want, tough to do. Great when you can do it, but tough to do. The other thing I'd ask is that as you grow, take a look at where you are, because the style that works is going to change as you get bigger. And the leadership style and your role in the company is going to change when you're $1 million, when you're 5 million, when you're 20 million. And it's where a lot of founders get stuck, is they do great until a certain point. And then they get big enough that they have a board or they have enough company, and they get thrown out. And I'm sure you've heard that a lot. And that's because their style and what they want to do is no longer applicable to the size of the company. So you need to keep doing a check on yourself and what the company needs and where you are as you grow. So what we've been talking about is leadership drives culture, and the question is sort of what is culture? And we use culture to say that culture is the way we interact with each other and the behaviors we have on a day-to-day basis, both internally with our team and externally. It defines who we are, and every company has its own culture. How many of you have defined the culture for your firm? One? Can you share with us the kinds of things you looked at?
Oh, there's not like a boilerplate thing, but it's something we've discussed pretty thoroughly, and it's aggressively open door, I think is the best way to put it. And, you know, my previous startup, how I ran my group there was to have, like, we would have a weekly meeting where everybody would come, where it was an ideation meeting because we were the R&D experimental therapeutics group. So whether it was an associate scientist straight out of college or one of the other, you know, PhDs in the group, everybody was on equal footing to discuss different ideas or what directions that we could go. We also did these like kind of one-on-one constant things to talk about like where they, you know, where they want to be in their career, what their goals are, how, you know, how we can best facilitate that. And then I would try and make sure that everybody was met. Sometimes those things would be conflicting and you have to work with that, but it's kind of a actively, that's why I say aggressively open door, because it's not just, oh yeah, my door's always open, it's bringing people in through the door so that they can do that. But that's the culture that we did. And then there was like, you know, obviously things like, I don't know, we had a personal trainer every Tuesday come out, stuff like that.
Nice.
The
massage afterwards, I hope.
No, not so much, but those things, but you know, it was a startup, so things that could be done, like a friend who's a personal trainer, hey, they'll do a favor and have group kind of boot camp thing, or BYOB or potlucks or stuff like that. But that's just to make people happy. It's not a culture.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, we believe in personal and professional development. And so when you're hired, you have the option of seeing a therapist and a coach on an ongoing basis. Because I believe, and this is just from personal experience, that if you can bring your best self to the team, we're going to have a better chance of being successful. And there are things about you when we hire you that we just will not know. The things that may be impeding your success and your growth. That you know that maybe a therapist or a coach or a mentor can uncover in the privacy of that session. But that way we have a better chance of getting the best you to help us get to the championship from an athlete. So, you know, I just know that things are brewing within people that's stopping them from being their best. That they're not going to tell us in a team meeting, but if they have the opportunity, and we will pay for it, for them to really work through some of that stuff on an ongoing basis, the results have been amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing about like culture is like for us, it's always focused on what people are passionate about and making sure we align their passions with the task that we sign them up for, because that allows them to work longer and feel like they're not doing their job.
Okay. So when we set up our company, we actually sat down and put together what we call our conscious culture, because we'd seen too many companies fail on the basis of culture. And I love the stuff you guys were talking about. But our list was much longer than that, but we actually started to look at it. And it included things like, as I mentioned before, we integrate personal and professional. What does that really mean? Well, partly what that means, and my business partner has an almost 2-year-old. So she has different demands than I do on her time. She wants to, you know, go to something at the preschool, or she wants to take him to the doctor or whatever, and it's like, that's fine. As long as it doesn't interfere with business, nobody needs to get permission. And similarly, when I need to do things, I put them on the calendar. We're super open about that. And if something needs to be done, you know, one of us will work after hours, but we also have a culture that says we don't work 100-hour weeks. We have both done that. We're both done with that. But we get online when we need to. And most nights we're both on because we've taken a little time during the day to do something. And I will tell you that the very first time in our first year, she said to me one Friday, yeah, let's start at 11 this morning because I'm going paddleboarding with my cousin. I kind of went, you're doing what? To myself, and I bit my tongue and didn't say anything because we had agreed that that's what we were going to do. And for me, that was really hard because that's not how I grew up in business. And I grew up that you work 100-hour weeks and you better be there. Show your face. So sometimes you make decisions and they're hard to live with, but you have to really think through what does it mean. The other thing that we have in our culture that has become really important to us is because we're a service organization and because we do want to have this type of work, we have agreed with each other that we only hire grown-ups. And some of our clients are grown-ups and some of our clients are not, because we work with a lot of organizations that are having dysfunction in their workplace, and sometimes that's a leadership issue, and that's fine when it's a client. We're there to help them. That is not okay with me when it's in my company. I don't want to have to spend my time holding your hand because you don't know how to manage yourself. And that's not to say those are bad people, they don't fit with our culture. And that's one of the things we screen on. Yeah.
How do you, so even within grown-ups, if you want to use that term, which I like, because I'm in my 40s, I remember what was attractive to me looking for a job in my 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more like kind of what WeWork offers, this integration of social and work. But now I'm in my 40s, I have young kids, and that is not of interest to me at all. What now is of interest is like this flexibility and doing the things like your partner talks. How do you integrate those two things when you have both age groups in the culture?
That's a really good question, and I mean I can answer it personally. I think every company has to figure that out, and it partly depends on how big you are. Our first hire was in our early 30s, so not quite a 20-something. We were very reticent to hire a 20-something at that point because we couldn't provide that kind of social environment. So we kind of said, she happened to be very mature, 30-something. We are now ready to somebody we're now about to hire is 27, but we have enough people in their 30s and enough of a social environment. We're on site with clients all the time that we can make that happen. It's an interesting balance, and I don't know enough about your company. That's something on a company-by-company basis.
I think it's something that everybody would struggle with because you want to hire, you want to hire all age groups because they bring diversity to the thought process.
Absolutely.
And you want the 20-year-old thought, you want the 60-year-old. I mean, that's a good practice.
Yep.
But the things that it's hard for the culture.
Yeah.
To figure, regardless of the business, I just think it's something that we would all struggle with.
So one of the decisions we made, and again, this is personal, it's not to say it's the right decision for you, is that when we started hiring, because we work virtually, that was not going to work for us. And we needed, just because of the kind of work we do, because innovation is sort of my thing, we didn't need that piece. Now we do, for a variety of reasons, and as we bring in younger people, we are moving out of virtual into more of a WeWork kind of environment so that there is that social environment for people and a place where we as a team can get together, because the teaming getting together was really important for us. But again, I'm happy to talk to you about it afterwards, but it depends on your individual company, but it's a good question. What I have found is that there's more alignment between the two ends of the spectrum than in the middle, because the middle has kids. I mean, I've been there. It's tough. It's just different demands. Yeah.
What about a culture that's flexible throughout the organization? For example, in our company, we have field biologists who are out doing ecology work in the field, and they're back and forth, sales and marketing, business types, MBAs, and lab people and R&D people, and it's a pretty diverse group of job sets, and it's important. We're also, clients are national and come from various backgrounds, are usually local to the area. Like where they work is where they grew up is typically who we run into. So we have to have diversity in culture as well. And so when we have a group to build on that point, we have a group that's going to require basically a pretty large diverse group of people's interests, cultures, backgrounds, ages, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I like the WeWork space. I also like getting out in the lab. I like going in the field. But yeah, I have 4 kids, so there's that too. So anyway, thoughts on flexibility of culture?
Flexibility can be part of the culture. You can define it that way. But there has to be a commonality and an umbrella culture that applies to all. Because otherwise what you find down the road is the guys who have the super flexibility over here, and then people who are working 9 to 5 over here, the 9 to 5ers suddenly get really jealous because they find out that these people don't have to be in their seats like that. And you're going to have a problem.
They're paddleboarding.
They're paddleboarding and they didn't tell you. Or they did. Yeah.
I have 2 quick questions. One is that list that you showed of what typically people think culture is, like ping pong table, etc. The way I see it is that it's a way to compensate for slightly lower salaries, compared to industry standards, and that's the reality. We startups can't pay what established companies do. So instead of doing all that, what are the other perks that you could possibly, add to the job? And second question is when you're starting out and there are some people
working remotely and virtually, like how can you keep that culture intact, even if it's just temporary and like everyone comes under one umbrella?
So, your first question?
Was related to company culture and not ping pong tables, but what can you do
Okay.
instead?
So there's any number of things that you can do, and it's worth sitting down and brainstorming. But they range from companies that give incentives to employees for bringing in business, which may not be typical in your area, or for doing something that you might expect somebody to do as to prove that they're ready for the next level. But in most organizations, you just do that, right? You always do the next job before you get the title, but paying people for that, paying them something extra because they're bringing revenue in for you in doing that. So something of that sort. Giving them the flexibility to say, hey, if you want to do some work on your own, that's okay too. Now, give you an example. One of our clients, we provide some coaches, type of coaching. We provide coaches for them. So these people work for us. They are our employees, and they do a lot of stuff for us. But we also tell them that if you have individual coaching clients already, and you want to keep them, and you want to keep that business, that's fine. So it gives them an opportunity to. That's the kind of business that they've been doing after hours and on weekends anyhow. That's fine, we don't want to take that revenue from you. So trying to figure out what it is that they're looking for. Sometimes it's just that they want the flexibility to be able to leave in the middle of the day to go do something, and if that fits with your company, make it clear that that's okay as long as they get X done, that kind of thing. So lots of different ways, worth sitting down and just brainstorming. And as far as the virtual is really tough. And I know there's a ton of literature out there on what you can do to run a virtual company, so you can go read it. I will tell you that statistically, the top 20% of employees, of producers, their productivity skyrockets when they're working virtually. And the bottom 20%, they fall off the chart altogether. They stop working. So now you've got that middle 60% of what do I do with them? And I've seen it work and I've seen it not work. It works when there's a steady conversation, when you are in touch on a regular basis. It's good to have a team touch-in periodically. Where it falls apart is when you try to do that too often. The worst thing I've seen this in a couple of different companies, is they have a morning meeting. Every single freaking morning. And everybody gets on the phone. Because they're all working in different places, they each have to kind of go through what they did yesterday. And the CEOs and the founders and leaders invariably think this is great. This is how we're keeping everybody together. And when you talk to those employees, every one of them says, this is just a way to update the CEO, and I'm so bored, and I wish we would get rid of these. What we found works better is you have them get together once a week. That's part of the job. And if they can't, then they have to call in. And you go through with success stories. You go through with failure stories. One of the most successful things we did was Failure Fridays. And everybody talked about a failure they had that they identified early and got out of. It didn't have to be a turnaround situation. Sometimes it was, I tried this, it didn't work. And sometimes people had just really great ideas to, but did you go back there? Because we're bringing together people with different skill sets. So bringing them together in certain ways, but making sure they have the freedom not to feel like they've been micromanaged.
Just an example of the culture that I worked with I was contracted by them to develop a cancer diagnostic platform, and I just adored their culture. And it's now a very large company, but they've maintained a great culture there from whenever they were small before they got acquired. Was over at Thermo Fisher here in Austin. They have a weekly project thing. All their projects are named kind of fun things. Whoever the project lead kind of rotates, so different people get to take ownership no matter what the kind of status is. And then when one launches, they celebrate, and when fails, they celebrate. So one was called Mojito, so whenever it got canceled, we all drank mojitos at the end of the day. It was great. And we celebrated by burning the project and outside on the barbecue.
Fear of failure is a huge demotivator in companies. And even though people say, I want you to be innovative, I want you to try new things, think about what your response is going to be when they come back and say, I just spent 40 hours doing this. It's not going to work. How do you respond to that? That's really the issue.
Companies don't have ideas. Only people do. And what motivates people are the bonds and loyalty and trust they develop between each other. What matters is the mortar, not just the bricks.
And that's what you were talking about. It's how do you work together? What is that culture? I think we're a little short on time, so I'm not going to, I was going to ask you to do some work here, but I'm not going to. But take a look at what's up here. Your leadership behaviors are what mold your culture. And it's your behaviors. You know, remember, if you have kids, or when you were a kid and you remember your parents saying, do as I say, not as I do. Same thing works in a company. You've got to model it. Do as I say, don't, not as I do. Doesn't work. It doesn't fly. My children paid no attention to that, I discovered. So the top one to me is really critical. How are you reinforcing the behaviors that you want? What we have a tendency to do as leaders is to say, no, that wasn't right. Yeah, I really didn't like that. Can you do this? How do you catch people doing what you want them to do? And how do you actually reinforce that? It's your behavior that's going to do that. Leaders have far more influence than they think they have. One of the CEOs I worked with at one point, it was a big company, it was earlier in my career, told me he had, we finally called them snowflakes. He would send out a note, it was a big company, and he would just send out a little note, and people would, and just, I just want this information, just kind of curious. And it started here, and by the time it got down to the lowest levels, it was a snowstorm because the CEO had asked for it. And everyone's running around putting it together, and so be careful what you ask for. You have a lot more influence than you think. How are you supporting work-life integration? I shared with you from a culture standpoint one way to do that, or what we're doing, but that doesn't mean that works for you. You might also want to have something, work hard, play hard, might work for your company, but figure out how you're going to actually support people in doing that. It's really tough. How are you empowering your employees? We talked about that already. The other one I think is really important is how are you holding people accountable? So you're all talking about kind of flexibility and freedom, and how do you hold them accountable for what you want them to do? And you guys talked about you have goals, you check to make sure people are reaching those goals, and that's great. Holding people accountable not just for reaching their business goals, but for the behavior that you want them to exhibit, the way you want them to interact with clients and with each other. How are you going to do that? So I'm going to since we started a little late, I'm going to just take another 5 minutes if I may, and ask you to think about your conscious culture. If you don't have a conscious culture, your culture will happen to you. You will have a culture. I assure you, you have one now. So it's better to sit down and think about it and write it out. And culture is really, it comes from a number of things. Number one, it has to be driven by your strategic focus. Don't underestimate that. And I'm going to walk through an example here. Number two, it's your management style. Number three is the workforce skills that you want. How does that fit into your culture? And you were talking about different skill sets that you need. So if you're in a production line kind of environment, the work skills that you need and what's going to work and what's going to drive personnel longevity or how long you actually want people to stay is really different than if you're in a relationship business where you're developing relationships over time and you're building that up. Just a word about personnel longevity. If you're in a highly creative, coming up with new things all the time type of environment, you might not want people to stay all that long, right? You might want a few people who have some institutional knowledge and some market knowledge and who maintain that, but you might want to be bringing in fresh blood and fresh thinking. So it might be that 5 years is a really great time for people to leave. Other companies, you want people to stay for a really long time. They have deep-seated relationships. You don't want them to go. That's critical to how you set up your culture. And then the environment that you're in. So I want to give you an example of how all of those things play together, rather than just throw words at you. And this is what we call the Google example. This was Google in its early days. It's not necessarily representative of Google today. But when Google was first set up, remember way back to the early slides when I said, when we were talking about who you're marketing to? We said it's people who are going to work for you and your competitors as well as your audience, your buyers. Google understood that probably better than anybody else way back when. They started with their strategy, and what they wanted to be was a leading-edge technology innovator. That was their strategy. That drove their culture. Because they then said, we need a young and creative workforce. We need to bring people in. We need to keep getting new ideas. We need to be on the leading edge all the time. We need to know what the millennials are thinking. We need to know what the next generation is thinking. And the generation that hasn't even quite come up yet. In order to do that, innovation we know now, excuse me, from a lot of research is that immersing yourself in innovation really works. It works best when people work together. Your companies are far, I'm sorry, lost my voice, are far more innovative when they have teams working together than when they have people sitting in solitary rooms brainstorming by themselves. So that said, they need to have a way to get these young people to come together, be innovative, and work together. And in order to do that, this is a little bit what started the ping pong tables and beer in the fridge. They said, it needs to be a way of life. So they have nap rooms, and they provided dry cleaning, and they provided dinners, and all of that are great from a perk standpoint. For Google, it was even better because they had people who were interacting and talking to each other and talking across silos all the time. And that was their source of innovation. And then they had very high compensation because they needed to kickstart people. And they were bringing in young people. So they wanted the best of the young people. Now, that doesn't work for some organizations that have what you want is long, slow. You want people who stay a really long time. You don't have to pay them a lot at the beginning. You want to build them over time. But that's how all of those pieces fit together to create the culture that will animate your company and make it a 3D company rather than a 2D company. And Margaret has a few things to say about that.
Now, this isn't about chumminess, and it's no charter for slackers, because people who work this way tend to be kind of scratchy, impatient, absolutely determined to think for themselves because that's what their contribution is. Conflict is frequent because candor is safe. And that's how good ideas turn into great ideas.
And how great ideas turn into great companies. So I will leave you with the thought that we would strongly recommend that each one of you sit down and write up a time capsule for yourself. What's your time culture? You're looking back in 10 years. What's your company culture? What's your leadership style? How are you as an organization going to go from being that 2D organization we started to talk about to being a 3D organization? And I think my time is up. So, so thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? If anyone wants to chat afterwards, I'm more than happy to hang around.